Welcome to Bible study. This is the Bible study we're preparing for December 1st in 2024, the first Sunday of Advent, change of a new year. Thanksgiving is in a few days. We pray that you have a blessed holiday with your family and friends, and that this coming liturgical year brings a lot of blessing to you. For the rest of December, we're going to continue in the work of the first book of Samuel. After that, we're going to go look at the work of wisdom in the Bible, and we'll spend a little bit of time there. We'll send you some information so you can prepare for that. We are in 1 Samuel chapter 13 today. Last week, we heard Samuel speak to the people, and he rather said, you've messed up. You've asked for a king. You shouldn't have done that. And he really got the people worked up about that with a sign and a wonder in the heavens. But what's interesting is he says, but God will bless you anyway. And herein lies an enormous truth we need to remember about God always. And that is that while our faithfulness and our fealty and our obedience to God is always a fickle thing. Today, yes, tomorrow, no. God never changes. God remains always who he is. And what he has declared himself to be for our sake is, of course, the God of gracious, forgiving love. The Bible's really down on the idea of using that as a license to do whatever you want to do. But the Bible is also and equally committed to telling us that even though we have sinned, God's graciousness is never exhausted by our sin. Today, as we come into chapter 13, we're going to see the tragedy that is Saul start to unfold. Saul lived for a year, it said. We don't know what he was doing, but he was there for a year, and then he became king. And when he had reigned for 2 years over Israel, he chose 3,000 men of Israel. 2,000 were with him in Michmash, in the hill country of Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan in Gibeah of Benjamin. And the rest of the people he sent home, every man to his own home. Jonathan defeated the garrison of the Philistines that was at Geba, and the Philistines heard about this, and Saul blew the trumpet throughout all the land, saying, "Let the Hebrews hear, let Israel," and Israel heard it, and a war begins. It seems that this started at the instigation of Jonathan, the son of Saul. We're going to run into him several times over the next couple weeks. But a war has begun. We're going to hear a couple of very interesting things in here. It appears, as we've noted, that the Philistines seem to have had a technology advantage over the Israelites. They also seem to have had very much an organizational advantage over them. We believe that they had the ability to work iron that the Israelites did not. There's a phrase later on in the chapter, it says, "There was no blacksmith to be found in all the land of Israel. For the Philistines said, lest the Hebrews make themselves swords or spears. But every one of the Israelites went down to the Philistines to sharpen his plowshare, his mattock, his axe or sickle. And the charge was 2/3 of a shekel for a plowshare and for the mattocks, and 1/3 of a shekel for the sharpening of the axes and for the setting of goads." It appears the Philistines had monopolized the working of metal, particularly the new metal that had come into the scene, and that was iron. They had been in a Bronze Age before, and bronze is it's a hard but brittle metal, and the only way to make it work is to make things very heavy and thick, and not very good for weapons of war, nor even for plowshares and the like. Iron is so much better. So on the day of the battle, there was neither sword nor spear found in the hand of any of the people with Saul and Jonathan. They didn't have any weapons. Saul and Jonathan, his son, had them, But the people did not. Now, it's probably the case that they had wooden spears and javelins, and they had bronze weapons, but they couldn't stand in front of an iron weapon of the Philistines, and only Saul and Jonathan had managed to procure them. They were at a significant technological disadvantage. Saul calls the people together to fight, but the Philistines also come out. And they give this enormous number of them, 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen and troops like the sand of the seashore in multitude. And the men of Israel saw they were in trouble. They hid themselves in caves and holes and in rocks and tombs. They were doing anything to escape. Saul, meanwhile, has been told, wait 7 days for Samuel to come, and he will make a sacrifice to the Lord, and then you can go to battle against the Philistines. But Saul saw that Samuel was late, and the 7 days had come and gone, and the people were scattering from him. And so Saul says, bring the peace offering, bring the offerings to me, bring the burnt offering. And without Samuel, he offered those offerings. And of course, that's exactly the moment when Samuel shows up. And Saul goes out and greets him, and Samuel says, what have you done? And Saul said, well, you weren't here. You said you were going to be here. You didn't show up. And all the people were running away. And Samuel says, you've messed up. And in effect, he tells him, you have failed the test. You have done foolishly. You have not kept the command of the Lord your God, with which he commanded you. For then the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart. The Lord has commanded him to be prince over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. And Samuel arose and went up from Gilgal. The rest of the people went up after Saul to meet the army, and they went up from Gilgal to Gibeah of Benjamin. And so Saul, pressured, took what he thought was the right thing to do. Notice, he sacrifices to God. He doesn't go into battle without the sacrifice, but he doesn't wait for Samuel to come. It seems rather vindictive, petty of God to do this. Why is it that Saul was put into this situation? Well, now we're into those why God questions, and those are always difficult and somewhat dangerous to do. But I think what Saul has not learned is really the lesson of the manna. Every day the people would go out into the wilderness and they would find food. They could only collect enough for that day. They always depended upon God. The next morning there would be more. If they collected enough for 2 days, what they collected would spoil. No, said God, trust me. Don't trust your army's strength. Don't trust your might. Don't trust your own wisdom. Trust me. And Saul isn't doing it. As the battle unfolds, Jonathan and his armor bearer go out in chapter 14, and they attack a small garrison of Philistines and overwhelm them single-handedly. Jonathan had said, well, let's go out and just present ourselves to them. If they say, come up here, we're going to go up and beat them because the Lord is with us. If they say, wait down there, then we will flee because we know the Lord is not with us. And so they kind of set up a test. And when they stand up, the Philistines say, come up here. And so they climb up because the Philistines thought they were going to defeat these two men. But the Spirit of God was with Jonathan, and he defeated them all. This begins this cataclysmic battle. Both of them had showed themselves to the garrison and the Philistines. They fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer killed them after him. And after that first strike with Jonathan and his armor bearer made, he killed about 20 men within about a half a furrow's length, an acre of land. And there was a panic in the camp, in the field, and among all the people. The garrison and even the raiders trembled, and the earth quaked, and it became a very great panic. Meanwhile, Saul is back at his camp going, what is going on? And they inquire, who's not here? What's going on? Has somebody left and gone on to battle too early? And they figure out that it's Jonathan. But meanwhile, the things that are going on in the Philistine camp are getting out of hand for the Philistines, and this great panic has come upon them. All the men of Israel who had hidden themselves in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines were fleeing. What happens is the Philistines turn on themselves. While Saul was talking to the priest, the tumult in the camp of the Philistines increased. Saul and all the people who were with him rallied, and they went into the battle. And behold, every Philistine's sword was against his fellow, and there was very great confusion. And the men of Israel had been hard pressed that day. And so Saul laid a rash oath upon them, saying, "Cursed be the man who eats food until it is evening, and I am avenged upon my enemies." In other words, don't stop and eat, just keep pursuing them. But Jonathan, remember, he's already been there. He's been in the thick of this from the beginning. And he doesn't hear Saul's command. And so as he's going along, they come across the honeycomb, and he puts his staff and he eats a little bit of it. This all comes out, and finally there is sort of this they inquire of God, and God is silent. Why doesn't God answer? They do this divination piece with the Urim and the Thummim, which is sort of a way of getting an answer from God. And it turns out that the problem is with Saul and Jonathan, and they choose between Saul and Jonathan. And Jonathan finally owns up to it. He says, "I ate something. I didn't know." And Saul says, "But the oath was strong, and now I must kill you." But the people intervene at that point. Saul says, "God so do to me and more, as you shall surely die, Jonathan." And then the people said, "Shall Jonathan die? He's the one who won the victory for us. He's the one who with his armor bearer went and started this thing. He's the reason we're winning today." And they said, "As the Lord lives, not a hair of his head shall fall to the ground." And so the people ransomed Jonathan, that he did not die. And Saul went up from pursuing the Philistines, unable to, because the Lord had withdrawn his support, and the Philistines went to their own place. And it says Saul fought all his days against the Philistines. And whenever Saul saw a strong man or a valiant man, he attached himself to him. Saul's behavior here, as it is portrayed in the text, is tragic, and I think that's the best way to understand it. He's a man who could do so much, and yet he fails, and he comes to this ruinous end. And here we see the beginning of that tragedy unfolding, of someone who is, no matter what he does, it seems fated, destined. In hindsight, that's probably what it appeared to be. Saul will be this tragic figure in the history of Israel. We're going to watch now as madness consumes him in his relationship with David. But what I think the writer of Samuel that wants to have these exilic people understand is really that this thing that has happened to us, this exile that we are suffering under, we brought this on ourselves. We did this to us. God was simply keeping promises. God has been simply holding us to our own word. It's very interesting. That's what happens in this text is Saul doesn't believe the promise of God, and when Saul makes an oath and swears by God to do so, and then doesn't do it, even when it was a horror to do it. You get the sense that Saul couldn't win, that there was no victory for him, that he was not the one. It says a great deal about God to us. I'd be interested in talking more with you about it. Let's pick it up on Sunday. God bless you.